introduction to everyone. Of course, you've got me, Andy, and Kirk, but of course we have Alan from Before the Sirens, Dave from Lowdown, and Styx, the sound guy. Next topic. Are recording studios becoming a thing of the past with the quality of home recordings? So having a think about that one. So we've seen, I did ask the Muskill guys, but Muskill did say that it wasn't a home recording. It wasn't anything they did. They actually were all done in the studio when we were talking about their most recent recording. But we have seen bands doing a lot of the pre-production work, maybe sometimes just using a bit of mixing in studios, not so much recording in recording studios. We're seeing a lot of people doing like bedroom recordings nowadays, and the quality of the equipment and availability now, whether it's plugins, whether it's drum sounds on like MIDI kits and stuff like that, and those sort of things. What's people's viewpoints about the role of the recording studios now? Are they becoming a thing of the past? Do they still serve a purpose? I know, look, you guys have, both Dave and obviously Al, you've both used recording studios recently. So I'm going to throw it over to... I'm going to actually ask Kirk first on this one, because you've listened to a lot of music and you've heard different bands from different walks of life doing recording studios, home recordings. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, the landmark event in... I don't even think we should use the term bedroom recording because the standard is so high, is that debut Periphery album from 2010. So Misha Mansour, he really showed, didn't he, especially in metal, you can do this all at home. But I will say that is not cheap. You know, he is a complete gearhead. I don't mean drug addict, by the way, which is an English. No, he's the capital value of his recording equipment is probably more than most studios because he's just accumulated it over the years. I wouldn't frame this as an either or, that just because one is starting to become popular, it must destroy the other. And I'll give you two examples. For example, I was listening to that Depeche Mode 1990 album Violator last night, and that is the best produced album of the decade. That it's like the first digital recording before digital software existed. It's just fantastic, that album. So back in the day, you did need to throw millions at a plush recording studio to get the most out of it. Same when you listen to that Korn album, which I think set a record in 2002. Is it called Untouchables? The budget for that was just insane. Now, listening to that compared with a Periphery album, you cannot tell the difference. You wouldn't know that one of them sucked up $2.3 million and then the other one was done at Misha Mansour's home. But one final thing before I pass it on, it's okay recording at home, but mastering it, as Styx will say, is a completely different thing, isn't it? So a lot of bands might record at home and then they'll send it to Jens Bogren, for example, in Sweden at Fascination Street Studios, and he will master it. And most metal bands will try and bring in his services. So I don't think it will replace it. I think it's good that the technology is there and it's increasingly getting cheaper. And of course, it encourages more experimentation because as the non-musician, I can only empathize with you guys. When you're in a studio, you're up against the clock. You cannot fuck around in that studio, can you? Because you paid for that time. Whereas if you're doing it at home, you can take more risks and you might end up doing things that you just would not be able to contemplate in a formal studio environment.
I'm going to hand over to Styx in a second, but I was just going to say around mastering, most people that will do mastering will always say that if your mixing and production has been done well, their job is very easy. It's not a huge amount. They're just getting your levels right and they're just looking to make sure the overall package feels complete. A problem we get with when people get sent stuff to mastering, and we did on my old band's first album, we sent it over to get mastered and the guys were like, holy shit, we're gonna have to remix this because there's stuff all over the place. We need to retweak it, and they had to do a whole piece of work on it because it wasn't right when we'd done the production piece. And I think that's the big difference where people send stuff, they do it at home, they think it's great, and actually the mixing isn't right, and they haven't got that right. If you can get your mixing right and it sounds great in the mix, the mastering, it should be simple. That's my understanding from what I've kind of read about it. But I'm going to throw over Styx. What's your thoughts on this?
So for me, personally, studio recording will always trump over home recording. For the first bit of it, there's the experience of doing so. When I was in my old band, we tried home recording. It didn't work for us. We went to a studio and the experience was great and the quality was great, mainly because our egos were taken out of the equation. We all wanted a bit more of ourselves in the mix. Whereas we had a producer sitting in a studio going, this sounds better, and it was that extra set of ears to listen in. And for us, that was really valuable and gave us a much better end product. And yeah, it's just having someone there with the knowledge of what to listen to and how to get the best results.
Okay. Andy, you've done some recordings, so with your sort of stuff. So what about your experience with recordings?
Like Aaron said, the experience of going into the studio must be fantastic. I haven't done that, to be honest. We hope to for the next Nomadic Rain recording, but the album that I was involved in was done in-house, at home, in the bedroom, whatever you want to call it. And as someone else mentioned, you haven't got the time pressure. You know, we did take our time. You know, there's no pressure on me particularly to get my parts right, because I was obviously the one who had the biggest learning curve. You know, the whole experience, the whole procedure. So now I've done, you know, stage one, as in a recording at home on Cubase with a laptop in someone's front bedroom. The jump going into a proper recording studio should be a little, you know, the transition should be a little bit easier for me. So I'm looking forward to that as and when it happens. But I think, as Aaron said, or you said, David, you know, there's room in the world for both, depending on what your end product wants to be, what your desires and goals are, and what you've got to spend, what time and money you've got to spend, I guess.
That's a really good point. We can get onto that as well about costs, because that might be a deciding factor of why bedroom production is becoming more popular in that sense. Because of the fact that with the Spotify's and the cost of, you're not really earning that revenue return from music. So CD sales, although I've seen CD sales are starting to increase, especially from live performances, we're seeing a lot of bands selling out on those. So people are still now starting to want to get more tangible. They want to buy something from the band, which had dropped off a couple of years ago. I think since we came out of lockdown, that seems to become a bit more of a popular thing. People wanting to buy something tangible. But spending the sort of money you spend going into a recording studio, bands are looking at it going, well, we're not going to make any of this back. We can just about, if we're lucky, we're playing gigs, and that's just about going to cover us the money that we're going to be paying for going for rehearsals. So is it really worth it? Now, Al, you did your first few tracks, like was it Save Yourself and stuff? Did you do a lot of that production yourself? And then on the latest EP, you were in the studio.
That's right.
Take us through that process from your point.
The recordings we did at home were out of necessity. I hate talking about the C word because it feels like I've got some sort of PTSD from it, but it was out of necessity. So there's 3 tracks that we've got knocking around that we're probably going to pull out now, and I'll explain why. Because there's reasons, but they it was something that kept Chris and I busy at evenings, you know, like when we weren't working, when we were, you know, throughout lockdown, when there wasn't anything better to do, and it's something that we enjoy doing now. Almost every track that we do in the band these days, I will what I call guide at home. So essentially we'll come up with an idea in practice, I'll record it on my phone on, you know, the little like voice memo thing, take it home, take it to bits, do the program drums, do the guitars, do some vocals, and then that's the kind of, it means that everybody's got a reference point then for the idea. On a limited budget, so with very, very limited equipment at home, it's good fun to do, but you won't ever get the results. I believe we're on a as I say, on the sort of shoestring budget we're talking about. I don't think you'll ever quite get the results of a recording studio, because obviously they've invested in their equipment and everything else. But I think that the biggest difference for me is the engineer himself. Styx mentioned it earlier about having somebody produce it, but I found, particularly with the last EP, and particularly with Max, who's fantastic, by the way, at London Road Studios. He's a don, like, the guy's ridiculous, but he stretched me, like, particularly vocally. You know, vocally I knew what I was delivering, like, you know, as I say, I've got a small home studio thing here. I could get my mic out and deliver one of our songs, and it would be reasonably passable. But what Max could hear, I hadn't considered. So like harmony lines and things like that. And he was like, what about if you push this note? And what about if you did this? And he was doing it with the guitars and the drums as well. And you don't get that, Sticks mentioned about egos. It's also that kind of, it's almost like a second pair of eyes that see your track, see your album, see a certain part of a song in a manner that you hadn't seen it. What about if you try this? And I think that was the massive, apart from as Stick says, the experience of being in the studio, and all right, there's a time pressure, but actually like it means that in the same way that we were talking about getting people off stage, people move there a little bit quicker and they get on with it. But it is an experience, and if you've got a good engineer, a good producer that you're working with, they'll elevate that track to a level you didn't think was possible. And that's certainly, from my personal opinion, what we found with our latest EP from anything else we'd ever done, was that what came out of that really felt like a kind of a partnership between us and the engineer himself and Max, and that is the reason why I think that while home recordings will always be a thing, particularly if you're working on like guides, or if you're working on getting a track out quickly, or particularly if you're like like an artist that's just a one-man band, like you're producing dance music or something like that, then you are likely to work at home. But in sort of my environment, in the sort of like heavy rock metal environment, I think that recording studios themselves will always have that extra edge, if I'm being honest.
Okay. Dave, what about yourselves? Because obviously you've done your recent EP. So how was that experience? Was that studio? Have you done previous ones at home recording? How's yours set up been, and what's your experience been?
So I completely agree with Alan. So I completely agree with him that I think that it's not necessarily the recording studio, it's the person that's in it. I don't even think it's the equipment. Don't get me wrong, it helps and it can make something good great. But I do think it's the person, it's the producer, it's another set of ears that might hear things that you probably wouldn't have heard. And also, I do home recording. I have a home setup, but I don't use it for released recordings. I use it for demos, ideas, and tracking. So generally what we would do is or this Ant also, my bro from Navajo, Ant, second guitarist, he also does this, and he's actually better at it than I am. He'll sit down with the idea and he'll track the demo, and that will be a demo, which will be our ghost track. And then we would either take that with us to the recording studio and have that as the ghost drummer guide track, and he can drum to that. Or, we wouldn't use that, it would just be the idea. But I've never been good at working from home. So I've always been better at leaving my home to do, whether it be, I don't know, the gym, practice, recording, work, anything like that. I've never been good at doing it at home. So I think it enables you to physically go into an area where you are going to be achieving your goal in that area, in that room. And if you don't do it, you don't leave, provided you can pay for that. But no, I do think it's the person. So going back to your original question, I don't think the home recording / studio recording is as poignant as the person that's in it or the person that's physically doing it. Like, for example, Kirk, Misha Mansour, he can do that job that he did for Periphery for other people. Devin Townsend produced loads of other albums, but he still sends his away to get it mixed, or no, maybe it's mastered by someone else. He does a lot of it in-house. And I think Alan picked up on a point as well. Coming out of, the C times, the dark times, a lot of people learn how to do their trade. A lot of people had to, because they had so much time. So no, I don't think it's old or gone, but I do think the people that are in those rooms matter more than the bricks that build it.
Okay, good points from everyone there. We didn't get to a conclusion, but we got to a good kind of consensus of different viewpoints on the recording studio, so I think it has its purpose. And I think if you want a good quality one, you go into the studio. And I agree, it's the person. It's definitely the that bouncing something off. I know when I did the last Nothing Gained album, I went in there thinking I was ready for it on the drums, and I just thought, yeah, nailed that take. And the producer was like, yeah, I think you've got a better one in there. I'm like, what do you mean? I went, no, I think you could do a better take on that. Go for it again. Just see if you can just tighten the nuts up on your cymbal work. He said that just felt a little bit loose there, but yeah, run it again. I'm thinking, bloody hell, you pain in the ass. And then I ran it, and then I'm like, actually, you know what? That was a hell of a lot better take. He was like listening to those bits. You think you're great, and then they can actually pick it up. So yeah, having a good producer does help.
You need someone to pull you up on your bullshit.
Yeah, it's very easy to kind of just accept.
Yeah.
When you're doing your own recordings, you go, you know what, that's good enough. That's a good take. That'll do. That'll work. And that's a lot of. I do that with a lot of the demo things. You're like, yeah, you know, that'll work. And then you listen to it about 3 or 4 weeks later, and you're like, that was shit. So that really needs reworking. The problem is you don't do that. If you put that on an album 6 months after putting an album out, you're like, we can't play half the songs on the album because they're bloody awful. We're not going to put them out again. So yeah, having a producer does help. Should we move on? We have more questions.